Well, thank you for the introduction. And I'd like to start off by saying thank you to my faculty advisor, Dr. Girash, and Dr. Robin Berry, and Dr. Robert Anderson, who weren't available today to come to my talk, but also Mr. McAlpine for being my NDS advisor during my program, during my time in the NDS program. And so I'm going to be talking to everyone about the integrative treatment approaches to treating opioid addiction. So before I start, I just want to start off with asking a basic question. So looking at this list of individuals, what do you guys see is similar between all of them?
They're famous.
Yes, they're famous.
They will have drug issues, right?
Yes, they have drug issues, more specifically
Opioids.
opioid addiction. Great. So yes, they've all at some point in their lives been addicted to opioids. And this leads me into my next point, in that opioids are very addictive drugs, and although they are pain relieving and they have analgesic effects in the body, they are very addictive and they have high abuse potential due to the euphoric effects that result after their use. And looking more nationally at information, we see that there's an increase in unintentional overdose-produced deaths due to the abuse of prescribed opioids, not even illicit drugs. So we see that from 1999 to 2008, there's a gradual increase in unintentional deaths due to the misuse of prescribed opioids. And more specifically, bringing it to more relevant information, in 2013, 48,000 heroin addicts were identified in Baltimore out of 60,000 individuals who were addicted to drugs. So as you can see, this is a very prevalent problem, even in Baltimore, right down the street from where we are. So how do we even tackle this problem? A lot of research. Okay, what's going on?
So it must be a delay.
Yeah. Okay. All right. A lot of research has been done that uses methadone maintenance therapy and contingency management as forms of treatment. But my Capstone project revolves around a more effective way of treating opioid addiction, in that you're combining these two therapies. Methadone maintenance therapy is a program where it prescribes doses of methadone, which is a historic opioid therapeutic drug, and doses to these individuals who are addicted to opioids. And contingency management is a psychotherapy that reinforces positive behaviors through rewards and incentives when the individuals display certain behaviors when they're practicing drug abstinence. So my research question is, does the combination of these two therapies actually mitigate the negative effects of opioid addiction? And the negative effects being social isolation, drug craving, and neurological dysfunction. And I also want to point out that the answer to this question isn't exactly intuitive. Although you have two programs that work well together, they may not have a synergistic effect. And just because they work well individually, it doesn't mean that together they're going to do just that. So in order to answer this question, I conducted a systematic literature review, and I had a specific selection criteria of my literature, in that I only looked at studies that were conducted in the United States that were randomized clinical trials between the years of 1992 and 2008. And I only looked at studies that had positive outcome measurements of negative urinary tests, increased treatment and retention and attendance, and also increased drug abstinence. So here's a timeline of my project. I started by formulating a question and determining what methodology I wanted to use, and that being a literature review. And then I set a criteria for what studies I actually want to look at. Eventually I found 11 studies that actually fit with my criteria, and I collected the data, and I suggested integrative strategies that would help me analyze this data. And I'm currently at the process of composing systematic literature review right now. So the disciplinary perspectives that I'm using for my project are biology, psychology, and chemistry. And these disciplines all have interconnections between each other. Biology tells us about the neurobiology of addiction. Psychology tells us about the behaviors that manifest due to drug addiction and when drug treatment actually occurs. And chemistry tells us about what happens at the chemical level when drugs are used to alleviate opioid addiction. So here I have a concept map that outlines all the concepts and perspectives from each discipline with my question centered in the middle. And I just want to, there's a lot going on here, but I really want you to focus on the interdisciplinary connections between each discipline. So I use 3 bridging strategies to actually build connectivity between my research, and one being building complex and multi-causal explanations, and that's between the contingency management and methadone maintenance therapy. And although each therapy has a different method of alleviating opioid addiction, methadone being a more direct pharmacological target, while psychology or contingency management being a more behavioral and habitual improvement technique, they all reach the same goal of reshaping the brain to actually exhibit a behavior of an individual not using drugs. So I wanted to build that explanation that it's more so the brain being reshaped as opposed to these individual treatments being exhibited. There's also another bridging strategy I used was bridging the explanation-action gap. And this strategy talks about how one discipline is used as an explanatory method, and another discipline suggests a solution to that problem that's being explained. So biology explains how drug addiction actually occurs in the brain, and how it's like a neurological dysfunction, and how we use drugs to actually treat that dysfunction and reinstate normalcy and functionality. But with psychology may be suggesting that how about we use contingency management to resolve those issues, and how about we focus more on these individuals' behaviors so that we exhibit some positive outcome behaviors which will reshape the brain and reinstate normalcy and functionality in the brain that has initially gone awry due to drug addiction. And lastly, I wanted to redefine the concept of recovery. And each discipline, psychology and biology, define recovery in different ways. And biology may be defining it as certain brain mechanisms being back to normal, or while psychology may be explaining as an individual not using drugs for a certain period of time. But my goal with my project is to redefine recovery as a way that encompasses all aspects of recovery, and that the brain is back to normal, the individual is exhibiting these positive outcome behaviors as opposed to solely one thing or the other. And this just outlines what I just said. So what exactly did I find? Across all 11 studies that I actually found in my literature review, conclusively said that methadone maintenance therapy in conjunction with contingency management has synergistic therapeutic effects. And here's a graph from a study in 1999 that showed that when take-home methadone privileges were given to these opioid dependents, and that's the contingency that the individuals had to, that's the contingency the individuals use to actually exhibit their positive behaviors. When they aren't given this contingency, they exhibit about 100% positive opioid drug test. Meanwhile, if they are on this contingency, you can see that that's a little bit significantly, that's actually a little bit lower than when they aren't on the contingency. So it is indeed effective when these individuals are on combined treatment. I also found that more specifically, methadone maintenance therapy and contingency management together are more effective than other psychological and pharmacological combination therapies. In this case, buprenorphine is used with performance feedback. And you can see due to this solid pink line that methadone maintenance with contingency management is more effective in exhibiting negative drug-free urine tests compared to the other combinations of drug and psychotherapy. So the limitations to my study was, one, I'm only one person, and I didn't have a lot of time to do this. So there may be literature that I missed, and I also had trouble accessing literature due to restrictions as a student. And not a lot of the studies that I found looked past the 8 to 10 week period when they were just exhibiting intervention. There wasn't any studies that I saw that looked, okay, what happens when these individuals aren't in a structured outpatient clinic? And another question that I had when I was doing these studies were what exactly were the motivations of the outpatient clinics? Were they trying to understand the mechanism of how combined treatment works, or are they only seeking to understand whether or not it was successful when you combine these two treatments together? So future directions for this study would be to propose more studies that actually looked at the mechanism of combined treatment and understand what exactly is happening to the brain. And I would also like to find more studies that look past the specific 8 to 10 week or 12-week long intervention period and see if there's an actual given amount of time that these individuals have to be on this combined treatment. Because if they're on methadone forever, it's technically not a recovery because they're still dependent on another drug. And I would also like to have a statistical component that supplements my qualitative analysis with a quantitative one. So in closing, this was definitely a challenging project for me because I come from a more scientific background, and it's different for me to pull from different non-scientific disciplines in order to answer a question. But I realized that as I worked on the project more and more, I even found other disciplines that could be incorporated, such as sociology, given the environment that the individuals may be living in. And this wasn't included due to the limited scope and time that I had from the project. And lastly, I realized from this project that taking an interdisciplinary approach actually is very beneficial when tackling complex issues because you pull from different disciplines in order to understand a very complex and difficult topic to understand without that interdisciplinarity. And with that, I'd like to open for questions. Oh, yeah. So INDS. And with that, I'd like to open for questions.
Do you think some of the techniques you proposed to use in conjunction, like the methadone or other treatment, are relevant for other drug addiction diseases, not just opiates, but I don't know what else people could be addicted to, but anything else?
Yeah, definitely. I only chose opioid addiction because of the relevance to Baltimore, and it's very addictive as it's in itself, because heroin is one of the most addictive drugs out there. But definitely, I would imagine that combined treatment for other therapies would be beneficial. Actually, in a lot of the studies that I was looking at, they actually used cocaine a lot when they were comparing combined treatment with other drugs. So a lot of the individuals that were dependent on opioids were also dependent on cocaine, and they used combined treatment for them as well, and it had the same outcome.
And just as follow-up, so I imagine the chemistry and the biology of those will be different because they're different drugs, but I'm not familiar with psychology, but would that sort of be the same, people's behaviors when they're addicted to one drug versus people's behaviors when they're addicted to something else?
Yeah, well, considering most of the addictive drugs follow the same neurological pathway when they're actually having that, I guess, mechanistic effect, they all cause this big increase in dopamine in the brain. So I would imagine that they all would cause drug craving and addiction and overall social isolation because they want to get their, fulfill their drug craving so bad. So I would imagine that they all have the same psychological behavioral effects.
On your comparison graph, there was another drug. There was a drug used in 2 of those other combinations that was not methadone.
Yeah.
Are they trying to find alternatives to methadone? Is that in itself habit forming? Do people get hooked on methadone and they're trying to find a surrogate?
Well, based off of the information I found on methadone, it's an anti-addictive drug, so individuals aren't actually getting addicted to it. But based off of all the studies I've seen personally, I feel like there's a dependency there because they even use methadone as a contingency at some point, saying, okay, we're going to lower your methadone dose if you don't give us a negative urinary output. Mm-hmm. So I would imagine that there's a dependency on methadone because individuals feel or psychologically, I would imagine that if you're not taking a harder drug like heroin, and if you're taking methadone, which is supposed to be therapeutic, I would imagine that there is a dependency and a reliance on that drug to say that you are indeed getting better. But I haven't ran across any studies that actually gave me evidence that said it's addictive, but I just basic information on methadone told me that it was anti-addictive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
For contingency management, is that just allowing them to take different amounts?
So it varies. You can have a take-home methadone privilege. You can have a reward-based privilege. You can have incentives such as getting certain vouchers for like buying groceries or things. So it's also building like responsibility and independent living skills, but at the same time, it's dependent upon your behavior. So it's not like one category. There's different incentives that these individuals have that encourages them to not use drugs.
So because it's behavioral, that's why it's related to psychology?
Yes, and it's the fact that it's like a motivation thing. Like if I give you $5 and you give me a week long of no drug use, then that's like, you're motivated to do that, you know?
Yeah, I think I lost it. Oh, no, I didn't. I'm just curious, did you read anything as you were doing your research about the relative cost of methadone treatment versus contingency management?
I actually saw that they were questioning whether the combination was cost effective because you are using so much money on actually supplying all this methadone, because methadone maintenance therapy is used as the standard treatment, and they add contingency management to compare whether or not it actually works when they're together. But yeah, there was a question of whether it's cost effective because you're spending so much money on giving these individuals money to exhibit certain behaviors, and you're supplying so much methadone, but at the end run, is it actually worth it? I did see that question come up though.
Well, thank you very much, but right on time, that leads us to our next speaker. Once again, we have to celebrate the departmental honours, so I'll save the clapping for one time round, right? This time it would be...
Yes, but I don't have another cord. Does that have a cord?
We're out of chords.
So Vivian also, I don't have an extra cord, so pretend I have a cord in my hand, and I will get you one by graduation. Vivian also took our core course for honors and did her capstone for honors, and congratulations.
Thank you.